My fiancé's parents wanted me to sign a prenup, saying their son's wealth should stay in the family. His mom even said, "You'll always be just a guest in his home." They were excited when I inherited millions, thinking I'd fund their fancy lifestyle, but I just smiled, slid the prenup across the table, and said, "Actually, let's talk about what's really mine." I met Bryan in college. He was one of those rich, charming guys who had everything handed to him but still seemed like a good person. His family was crazy rich, big estate in the Hamptons, vacation home in Aspen, a Manhattan penthouse fully paid off, but Bryan never showed off his wealth or made me feel less than him. After 5 years together, we got engaged. I was thrilled. I had a good job and worked hard, but I wasn't rich like them. I didn't think it mattered until I met his parents. The first clue was Bryan's mom, Megan, inspecting my engagement ring like it was trash. "It's modest," she said. I tried to shrug it off, but things got worse. Megan and Bryan's dad, Walter, invited me to lunch at a fancy restaurant. They didn't even bother with small talk. Megan just said, "We need to talk about the prenup." Walter explained it was a standard agreement to protect the family's wealth. I looked at Bryan, hoping he'd defend me. He stayed silent. Megan leaned in and said, "It's not personal, dear. You'll always be a guest in his home. It's just a formality." That hurt. It wasn't about the prenup itself. I would have signed it if Bryan had asked me, but they made it clear I'd never truly be part of their family. I signed the prenup anyway. It said that anything I earned or got on my own would stay mine. They thought it was just a joke. After all, what could I possibly bring to the table? Then, 6 months before the wedding, my great-uncle died. I barely knew him, but he left me almost $9 million from his investments, real estate, and patents. I didn't tell Bryan's family right away. I wanted to see how they'd react. Suddenly, they were treating me differently, fake smiles, fake kindness. Megan invited me to spa days. Walter started calling me dear. It was sickening. A week before the wedding, they invited me to dinner. Bryan was clueless, just smiling along. Walter slid a folder across the table. Megan said in her sweetest voice, "Since your financial situation has changed, we should update the prenup. It only makes sense, right?" I took out the original prenup from my purse and slid it across the table. "I love this agreement. Let's keep it exactly as it is." Megan's smile twitched. "Sweetheart, that's not really." "It is." I cut her off. "This agreement protects what's mine just like it protects what's Bryan's. It's fair, right?" Walter tried to argue, but I interrupted him. "You think I should take care of your family because you assumed Bryan would take care of me?" Megan's expression turned cold. "That's not what we're saying." "It is," I said, "and I'm saying no." Bryan tried to calm things down. "Babe, let's just..." I stood up. "I was willing to marry into a family that didn't want me. I was willing to sign your papers because I loved your son, but I will not be manipulated. You made this bed, now lie in it." I left them there, speechless. The wedding was tense, but I made it clear, the prenup stays, or there's no wedding. They were furious but had no choice. Bryan and I got married, but things were never the same. His parents' anger grew, and Bryan couldn't decide whose side he was on. That was the beginning of the end, but my real revenge? That came later. We moved into a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn that I bought myself. His parents hated it. They acted like the place was a dump. "It's nice," Megan said, her lips so tight they were almost white. Walter crossed his arms and nodded stiffly. "A bit small." I almost laughed. This was a $3 million home, but to them, if it wasn't inherited or didn't have a fancy name like the Bradford Estate or Wexley Manor, it wasn't good enough. Bryan just shrugged. "I like it." I wanted to believe him, but things started changing between us. It was small at first, Bryan acting defensive when I talked about work or making comments about how hard it must be for me to handle my finances. Then it got worse, him asking to combine our accounts even though the prenup kept our finances separate. The worst part was his parents showing up out of nowhere to pitch their new business idea. Megan sat across from me, tapping her fancy handbag. "We were thinking about growing the family investments," she said in her fake sweet voice. Walter leaned in. "Luxury condos. We've got some money ready, but with your resources, we could make it big." There it was. I took a sip of my coffee. "I don't invest in real estate." Megan laughed. "Oh, honey, you wouldn't have to do anything. Just put in money, keep it in the family." Bryan, sitting next to me, cleared his throat. "It's actually a really good opportunity." I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized, Bryan knew about this plan, and he let them go through with it. Megan noticed the look on my face and quickly added, "You have to understand, dear, this is how families work. We support each other." I put my cup down, slowly. "You mean I help you?" Silence. Walter's face tightened. "We're offering you a chance to be part of something bigger." I almost laughed. I leaned forward. I am part of something bigger, it's called not being used by greedy people. Bryan's head snapped up. Come on, it's not like that. Isn't it? I asked. You knew about this and didn't warn me. His jaw clenched. Because I knew you'd react like this. Oh, so I'm the problem? Megan sighed. Don't be so emotional, dear. Get out. My voice was cold and clear. They looked shocked, even Bryan. Walter scowled. Excuse me? I stood up. Get out. You think marrying your son gives you access to my money? You think I owe you something? Megan's face hardened. We're just trying to show you how our family works. I smiled. Good news, I get it, and that's exactly why I want you to leave. Walter stood up first, his face angry. You'll regret this. Megan stood too, smoothing her perfect dress. Bryan, she said sharply, are you coming? Bryan looked between me and his parents, like he was trying to decide whose side to take. I just need some air, he muttered, then he left, with them. He came back that night, looking like he'd been fighting with himself all day. I just needed time to think, he said. I crossed my arms, and? He sighed. Look, I get that you don't like them. This isn't about liking them, I said, it's about them treating me like a bank. He hesitated. They just want what's best for the family. I stared at him. Define family. He swallowed. Us. I raised an eyebrow. He hesitated, and my heart sank. Wow. He groaned. Can we not do this right now? I laughed without humor. Oh, we're definitely doing this right now. He rubbed his forehead like I was the one causing problems. I don't know what you want from me. Loyalty, I said, stepping closer. Respect. To not have to fight for my place in my own marriage. Bryan sighed, and I waited for him to say something, anything, but he stayed quiet, and that's when I knew, no matter what I said or did, Bryan wasn't strong enough to stand up to his parents. So, I made a big decision. I smiled. You're right. He looked confused. Huh? You said you don't know what I want, I said with a shrug. Let's fix that. I walked past him, grabbed my phone, and dialed a number I never thought I'd call. When Bryan saw the name on the screen, his eyes went wide. Wait, what are you doing? I pressed the call button. He stepped forward. No, wait. The line rang a couple of times before someone answered. Hello? I smiled. Yeah, I think I'm ready to move forward. Bryan went pale. He knew exactly who I had just called, and he knew this was going to be bad for him. 3 days earlier, I had a feeling things were about to get worse, so I planned ahead. Bryan's parents thought they could manipulate me, control me, and take my money. They were wrong. I made some calls, first to my lawyer, then my financial advisor, and then, the big move, I called my uncle's business partner, Ethan Carter. He was a tough, no-nonsense businessman who knew how to protect money and ruin anyone who messed with it. We met at his fancy office in Manhattan. Ethan looked at me and said, You're right, Bryan's family is trying to get your money through manipulation, and once they get access, they'll drain you dry. I nodded. So, what do we do? He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. We make sure they can't even get close. And that's when the real plan started. I walked back into the living room and put my phone away. Bryan was still standing there, fists clenched, breathing hard. Tell me you didn't just do what I think you did. I tilted my head. What do you think I did? His jaw tightened. You called Ethan. I smiled. Smart boy. He ran a hand through his hair. You don't understand how this works. I understand perfectly, I shot back. Your parents tried to use you to pressure me, and you let them. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Bryan tried to argue. My dad. I held up a hand. Stop. He froze. I continued, my voice firm. Your parents don't scare me, and now, they're going to learn why. I turned away and started heading for the door. Where are you going? Bryan asked, sounding desperate. I didn't even look back, to watch everything fall apart. I sat in my office, sipping coffee when the first call came in. It was Megan. I ignored it, then Walter. Ignored. Finally, Bryan called, and this time, I picked up. His voice was panicked. What did you do? I took a calm sip of coffee. Be specific. Our accounts are frozen. My dad's investors are pulling out. The real estate project is dead. My parents are freaking out. I let out a short laugh. Sounds like your problem. Bryan's voice shook. You set us up. I set my cup down. No, Bryan, you set yourself up when you let them come after me. For the past week, Ethan and I had made sure that every single one of their financial connections was cut. Ethan had contacts everywhere, and I made sure everyone knew that investing with Bryan's family was a terrible idea. Their business deals crumbled, their reputation was ruined, and their money was drying up fast. Megan was furious, Walter was desperate, and Bryan? He was finally realizing he made the wrong choice. You need to fix this, he said, voice shaky. I leaned back in my chair. Why would I do that? Because we're married. I laughed. Oh, Bryan, you really don't get it, do you? He was practically begging now. We can fix this, we can. No, we can't, I said as I looked out the window at the city below, but I can, and I already have. Bryan went silent, his breathing heavy and unsteady. Are you trying to destroy my family? I turned back from the window, my voice calm. No, Bryan, they did that to themselves. I just made sure they couldn't do it to me. Silence. Then he whispered, I loved you. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't show it. Maybe you did, I said, but you never respected me. Then I hung up. That should have been the end of it. I wanted it to be over, but it wasn't. A few days later, Megan and Walter realized their quiet, sneaky plans wouldn't work, so they went all out. They set up a family meeting, without telling me. They told Bryan to bring me along. Bryan called, practically begging. Just hear them out, he pleaded. I almost laughed. After everything, he still thought they deserved a chance, but then I thought, fine, it would be the last conversation we'd ever need to have, so I agreed. The penthouse felt cold and unwelcoming. Megan sat stiffly on the leather couch, her hands folded. Walter was at the bar, calmly pouring himself a drink. Bryan looked terrible, messy hair, loose tie, dark circles under his eyes. When he looked at me, he seemed lost, like he didn't know whose side he was on anymore. Megan spoke first. We're here to fix this. I crossed my arms. Oh, now you care about fixing things? Walter took a sip of his drink. Let's be honest, you don't want a divorce, so let's talk about a new agreement. I blinked, then laughed. You think I want to stay, after everything? Megan's polite mask cracked for a moment. Don't be dramatic, dear. Walter put his drink down. You've had your fun playing games, but we're offering you something real. We're offering you family. I stared at him. You don't offer family, you either are, or you're not. Megan huffed, frustrated. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly. My mistake was thinking I ever belonged here. Bryan finally spoke, sounding desperate. So, that's it? You're giving up on us? I looked him straight in the eyes. Bryan, you gave up first. He looked shattered, but Megan still had one last card to play. She stood up and straightened her dress. Well, she said sharply, it's a good thing you signed that prenup, then. I tilted my head. And why's that? Her smile was mean. Because you get nothing, no money, no support, no access to our world. You leave with exactly what you came in with. I grinned. You're absolutely right. I do walk away with exactly what I came in with, which, if you remember, is my entire fortune. Megan froze. Walter's hand tightened around his glass. Bryan's eyes widened, realizing they had nothing to use against me. I took a step forward. Here's what's going to happen. I'm leaving. You will never contact me again. No harassment, no manipulation, no trying to drag me back. Because if you do, I smiled coldly, I will make sure what's left of your reputation is destroyed. Megan started to argue, but Walter stopped her. He understood. I turned to Bryan. Goodbye, Bryan. He didn't say anything, so I left, and this time, I didn't look back. The divorce was quick, the prenup made sure of that. Bryan tried to reach out a few times with texts, calls, and even a handwritten letter. I ignored them all. As for his parents, they lost everything. The real estate deal collapsed, investors bailed, and their fancy social circles wanted nothing to do with them anymore. And me? I was free. I moved to a new city, traveled, and started really living. For the first time in years, I didn't have to look over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal, and maybe, just maybe, I was finally happy. Megan and Walter would never change, they'd just find new ways to manipulate and survive. As for Bryan, I don't know if he ever really understood what happened, or maybe he did and just couldn't handle it. But I learned something important. Love without respect is just a cage, and I was never going to let myself be trapped again. The end.